Hi, this is Edward Troxel. In today's tutorial, we're going to look at exporting envelope information into an XML file. I had read a post about exporting and importing the envelope information, and that particular post did a specific envelope, and so I wanted to kind of generalize it a little bit and make it work with multiple types of envelopes. And so this script will export any envelope that it finds on a selected track into an XML file, and then we will later look at how to get those back into another project. I've also made it work with multiple tracks, and so what the goal would be is to import them into the same track in the new project. And so let's just play with it and see what happens. And so the first goal is to export the information, and so let's take a look at how we can do that. Here's the script we're going to use to export the information. We have all of our using stuff at the top, then our namespace, test script, our public class, class 1. Then we have our public Vegas, my Vegas, and then I've added this in here which defines the coding into UTF-8. And then under the main routine, the first thing we do is set my Vegas equals Vegas. And then we have this part right here, which we've used several times in the past. All it's doing is creating a save dialog, specifying d:/ as the default directory, which that can be changed to wherever you want it to go by default. And then the save file type, which will be XML or *.star, which will let you do any type. And then if they have clicked on the OK button, we're going to continue. So the first thing I wanted to do is get the file name, which I put into my file. It is a string. And then we create the XML document, which is a new XML document. We create the processing information. It is a version 1.0, and we just told it is an XML. Then we append that to the document, and then we're going to create a root element, which I simply called Vegas, and then we appended that root to the document. Now everything else is going to be added under root. Then we want to go for each track in myvegas.project.tracks. If that track is selected, I'm going to create a child called track. And then for each one of those tracks, I'm going to add a couple of attributes. The first one is the track index, so that when I get to the new project, I can add it to the same track. And then the track type, so that I can look at that track. First of all, I need to see if that track exists by comparing the track index, and then I can look at the type of that track and see if the type of that track matches the type that I originally had. That way, if I can produce an error message if the types do not match. And then I'm going to export all of the envelopes on that track. So I'm going to call the export envelopes XML, and I'm going to send it this XML element, which we called EV, and then I pass it mytrack.envelopes. Then once all of that is done, I created an XML text writer using my file name and the character encoding that we specified up above, and then changed the formatting, the indentation, the indent character. Then we're going to write our document to that writer, and then we close that writer, which will get us the file on the disk. Now we need to look at the export envelopes.xml. Here is our export envelopes XML. We passed it the XML element, which we called EV here as well, and then a set of envelopes, which I simply called envelopes. Then for each envelope, which I just called env in envelopes, I want to create a new child. So here we created a new child, which I called envelope EV, which I just said add child and named it envelope. Then I wanted to set the attribute of the envelope type. That way we can add an envelope of the same type. And so we just get that from env.type. Then for each envelope point, which I just called ePoint, in envelope.points, I'm going to create a new child called envelope point, which I named EV point. And then for EV point, I'm going to set a set of attributes. First is the time code, which is ePoint.x. Next is the value, which is ePoint.y. And then let's go ahead and set the curve type so that we can set that back to the same curve that was originally used, which we get from ePoint.curve. And then once that is done, the export envelopes XML routine is finished. You can see we have an add child that we've used multiple times. Well, here is our add child routine. And so for the add child, we're sending it a XML element called parent and a string called child name, and all that does is return child string and parent comma child name comma null. So basically it returns the new XML element for the new child string. And then here's the child string, which is called here to actually create the element that's being returned. So we have an XML element child, which is parent.ownerDocument.create element, and we're getting it from the child name. Then we're parent.append child. We're appending that child into the parent document, and then we are returning that child. We are also passing in a child value, which in this case is null. And if it was not null, if null does not equal child value, then we would create some inner text using that child value string. And then if we continue on down, we get to our entry point, which is required by Vegas, and then our from Vegas routine. And then we simply set up our test variable, which is a new test script.class1, and then we call the test.main and pass it the Vegas variable so that we can read all of the Vegas elements. Next, I have a project here that has one video and one audio track, and I have one event on it, and here I've added a composite envelope, and you can see we've added several points on here. This one is at 29%, this one is at 40%, this one is at 100%, and let's go ahead and change one of these so that, let's set this one to fast, let's set this one to sharp, and then down here we have a volume envelope. Once again, let's change a few of these to a different type. Oops. Let's change this one to linear. Let's change this one to sharp. Let's change this one to fast. That way we'll have some different types that show up. So now let's run the script. Now we have to enter the name. Now when we look at the file, you'll see we have the XML version 1. Then we have the Vegas that we created at the very beginning. That's our root. And we could have called it anything we wanted. And then we have two tracks that were selected. First was track index 0. Second was track index 1, so we have both tracks listed here. And then for the video track, we have a composite envelope. And then we have our various time codes where the points were. And then we have the value of each one of the points. And then we have the curve type. First one was smooth, smooth, and then we changed that one to sharp and that one to fast, and the rest are all smooth. Then we get to our audio track, which had a volume envelope. And here we also have our various time codes and the values First one was smooth. We changed the second one to linear. Then we had a couple more smooth, then a sharp. Then we had another one that was smooth, and then we changed that one to fast, and then we did not change the curve type on any of the rest of them. But you can see there are several more time codes that are listed here and their values. And then we closed out the envelope section, and then we close out the track section, and then we close out the Vegas section. So the XML is now properly written. So now we've written a script that will properly export all listed envelopes that are on a track, in this case selected track, and it will export the type of envelope that it was, it will export the location of the point, it will export the value of the point, and it will export the curve type of the point. So we've exported quite a bit of information here, and we've also exported the track index and track type so that when we go to import it, we can add it to the same track using the track index, and we can compare the track type to the type that was in the original file. That way, if it has a different type, we won't try to import that kind of envelope. So we won't try to, for example, import a volume envelope onto a video track, because that won't work. So like, subscribe, and we'll continue this short little series. We've got the information exported. Now let's see if we can pull it back into another project. We'll see you in the next tutorial. Please sign up at www.jettv.com and subscribe on YouTube to get further notifications on when new videos are presented.